evening, and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Imani Rupert Gordon, and I'm the Executive Director for Affinity Community Services. Affinity is a social justice organization, and we work with Black, LGBTQ women, and other LGBTQ communities of color and gender-expansive folks, and we do it from the south side of the city. We're so excited that you've decided to spend your Friday night with us. But before we jump in, I'd like to introduce the folks that are in the studio today. So first we have our amazing volunteer, Arifa, who is answering phones today. So if you have a question for our guest, or you have a comment, or you just want to hear yourself on television, you can call in and Arifa will put you through. And for our guest today, we have Shelly Connor. Shelly is the Executive Director of Queer Square Collective Incorporated. Queer Square is a nonprofit for queer artists of color. Shelly, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
That's a pleasure. So let's jump right in. So at first I'd like to ask a question about your professional trajectory. We know that many people tune in because they want to know resources that are in the area, but other folks are really interested in our guests and specifically how they got to where they are now. And so I wonder if you can share with our audience what you do and how you got here.
Absolutely. So I'm a writer, and I did everything that I could think of to work on that, getting a PhD that I got in 2014. But there's a lot of community out there for writing and academic writing and things like that. But one of the things that I realized I needed specifically a Black queer artist community for writing. One of the things that a lot of writers, people of color and queer people realize when you're taking workshops as part of classes and things, you don't necessarily see the representation of yourself in other people's work, and they don't necessarily understand Black queer characters in your work or Black characters in your work. And so I was looking for a Black queer arts community, and I did find one. Powwow Collective was going pretty strong here in Chicago, but when that ended, I felt that there was a gap in the community. And so they hosted, I think at the time, the longest running open mic set in, I think, the country for 10 years straight, weekly. And when it ended, it just left a really large hole in the community. And so I first started by reconvening the open mic, but monthly, and I realized that we could be a greater resource for Black queer artists in the community, and just went from there.
Wonderful. So tell us more about Queer Square. So maybe go a bit deeper into what you were hoping to accomplish when you started, and now what does it look like today?
I had no idea what I was getting into. As anyone who starts an organization, especially a nonprofit one, you do not realize the depths of that rabbit hole.
Right.
I really just wanted a network and a collective of Black artists of all disciplines, and we have members in the literary arts, music arts, even culinary artists. And so I was primarily looking for a network. And then that grew into realizing that when we go to a lot of arts events, you don't necessarily see yourself represented there either. And so as an artist, as a writer, when I would get contacted, I realized I was just, kind of the token Black in queer performance spaces, and the token queer in Black performance spaces. And I realized there were fellow artists and writers who felt the same way, and I thought together we could be stronger.
Gotcha. Yeah. So representation seems to be something that is really important in your work and sort of has guided a lot of the things that you've done. When I was growing up, I didn't see a lot of Black queer characters, sometimes Black characters, sometimes queer characters, but there weren't a lot of them. And so I'm wondering, what are the characters that stood out to you?
Yeah, and I spent a lot of time thinking about that. You didn't see them a lot. And so earlier when I think about maybe in the 90s, Usually if there was going to be a black queer character, it typically was going to be a black man. He was going to be, explode the stereotype of the highly effeminate male hairdresser in the beauty shop, or artist or performer or something like that. So there was a lot of that, and they were used specifically for comic relief. And so you didn't really see characters having their own trajectories or being fully fleshed out. They were very flat characters and often used as a plot device, and at the worst, then they were going to be, bless you,
Thank you.
A villainous character as well, the whole sexual deviancy angle.
Right. So representation is one thing, but how people are represented is something else. You were talking about these characters that were effeminate, and there's nothing wrong with being effeminate. It's just one dimension of a character, and that it was something people were laughing at, like that was comic relief. And I'm wondering, do you think there's been a shift in the representation of black queer characters?
Definitely. First of all, the fact that we have black queer characters at all, so we can kind of see ourselves. And once that shift occurred from, them not being fully fleshed out, not having their own even storylines or desires or jobs or occupation, they typically were also used as a mechanism for white desire, white enlightenment, white achievement. Now you see characters a bit more fleshed out. You see them pushing against the stereotype. So you see a character like Omar in The Wire, who was a gangster who robbed drug dealers. He was the toughest person in that neighborhood, and everyone was afraid of him. You also see the same actor, Michael Kenneth Williams, playing also a non-stereotypical gay man, tough guy in the series Hap and Leonard. I'm still looking for more representation from black queer women, but you have Lena Waithe in Masters of None, that amazing episode that she wrote and won the Emmy for Thanksgiving. You also have How to Get Away with Murder, Annalise Keating, who seamlessly moves between intimate relationships with men and women. And it is such a non-issue in the writing. It doesn't even register. It's just part of her character as a person who uses and manipulates anyone who she's in any sort of relationship with. And then the character William on This Is Us, just seeing not just a black queer man, but also an older one, which we typically don't see at all. That's a whole nother facet that we don't see. So yeah, I think we're getting more black queer characters, more nuanced, and certainly more fully fleshed out and whole. But I think that's because, a lot of the pushback, people have been asking for it, and people have taken to creating their own web series, especially with platforms, early platforms like YouTube, but now that's becoming monetized, and there's some issues around that with what content gets placed and seen, and advertisers once you get into that. But people have been, you've got a lot of independent filmmakers, Cookie Hughes, one of our members, who's been producing films about black queer folk in Chicago for, I don't know, near 20 years. So I think that with the internet and social media, you now have that direct access to the audience. You can bypass major networks, and they're really starting to feel that. So yeah.
Yeah. So Looking at the early characters and then the characters that we're seeing now, how have you seen these characters improve, not just in sheer numbers, but the complexity and the nuanced storylines?
Yeah, so you still do have stereotypical characters. So you've got your Titus Andromedon on Kimmy Schmidt, but he is so fantastic to watch.
He's lovely.
You get characters like Lafayette in True Blood,
Mm-hmm.
equally fantastic to watch,
Mhm.
but kind of pushing against those stereotypes in certain ways or fully embracing them. I mean, the character of Titus is aware. And so, you know, being able to kind of play with that. You have our characters now having families. So the Fosters.
Right.
So you've got the biracial black woman and her white partner. So you see everything that we essentially had to fight for as black people and queer people being enacted on television. The result of that, we now can legally marry. For now, we can have families. We do have families and households. We do interact outside of our communities, and we have relationships and interactions within our communities, and seeing what those communities look like outside of club culture.
Mm-hmm.
You know? So I think this is slowly making its way onto the screen. In fact, in certain respects, we might even be coming full circle because, as we were talking about earlier, Wanda Sykes, I don't even know if she's playing a lesbian on Blackish.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so, and it's not essential to the storyline, but again, you have to look at, we're still fighting for storylines, so
Yeah.
that absence is there. Every time I see her, I'm laughing at what she's saying because she's funny and it's a funny show, but I'm also like, are you a lesbian? Are you going to say something on this show to let us know about, you know, your wife or kids or something like that? Because the other characters do.
Right.
And I have not
Right.
watched every single episode of Blackish, so if she did, I apologize and I may have missed it. But even as a joke, you know, they joke about their family and home life because they're supposed to be playing off of the character Dre's family and home
Right,
life as
right.
well. And so I just haven't quite noticed that with her
Gotcha.
character.
Yeah, we do always want to see that representation, you know? I think one of the things about Titus's character, I really, really like, I mean, I like that show because he's on it. For me, he is the thing that makes it funny to watch, that makes it worth watching. And it's not that he is someone that's so admirable necessarily, though when we don't have a lot of representation, oftentimes we do want, you know, like this pillar, this perfect person. But I don't mind that his storyline is nuanced and he's, you know, a lazy character, or, you know, that there's other things about him that, you know, I think having as much screen time as he does give him some complexity. And so even if he's not, you know, the most admirable person, he certainly has a well-rounded character. His character's developed.
Yeah, I mean, we get his history. He was married. He's, you know, a small town southern boy, and just, you know, his arc as told through him. And he's admirable in, again, as a writer, as an artist, this is a man who just does not give up on his dreams and is willing to take humiliating and demeaning jobs in order to live the actor's life of always auditioning and things like that. And so there are definitely some admirable things about him. And in a show like that, he, along with all his other characters, all of them are, I mean, their purpose is to make sure that the main character is okay and see her through. So, yeah.
I hear you. So, this is fun. What are some of your favorite examples of Black queer characters that we see now?
So, yeah, of course, love Lena Waithe's character on Masters of None. I really, really like William or liked William before they killed him off on This Is Us. I would have to say also, let me think, Claus, the character Silent Anne on the dramedy Claus, is pretty funny. So yeah, just but the thing is, we're still talking about, you know, co-stars. We're
That's true.
not
That's
seeing a black queer character with their own show on any major network. We definitely see all of that when we get into, you know, web TV and things like that. But we do have one coming out soon. HBO is developing one of Open TV's shows, Brown Girls, which was nominated for an Emmy, and I know we'll get to talking about that soon. But Laverne Cox's character on Orange is the New Black, although I no longer watch that show. I didn't watch the season when they killed off Poussey, one of my other favorite black queer characters.
Right.
So yeah, they're characters. I would love to be able to name shows named after characters or based solely on black queer characters. And especially when you look at what they're doing, I mean, they've come back out with Will and Grace.
Right.
It's like
right.
Will and Grace again. All right, they had their time, you know? And so it's like, 10 years later, look, they're all still in the same place, just 10 years older. There are so many new stories that need to be told. So that kind of is like a slap in the face. And this is why major networks are seeing such a decline in their viewership, and why people are flocking to web series and Netflix and Amazon Prime TV shows and Hulu original TV shows, because they're mining all of this, all of these stories that major networks are still very skittish about.
That is it. It is nice to know that there are more options. It's just nice to be seen, you know. I know that there was a lot of pushback around the hashtag Oscars So White, and then there's pushback again when Issa Rae was asked who she was rooting for, and she said everybody black. Why do you think there was so much pushback there?
White people. Black people aren't pushing back. No one else is pushing back on that. It's when whiteness is not centered, it's a problem. You know, we call ourselves and our experience marginalized because we are on the margins. And so when we say, hey, we have stories, we have ideas, we have people, we have characters that are central to their own being, you can't center whiteness in it. They have no problem saying whiteness should be centered in a show like Girls, because that's all she knows, that's all she sees, that's her world, it's white. I believe that. You know, even as she's gentrifying a neighborhood that's all brown. You know, her myopic eyesight only shows her whiteness. Our experiences, especially when you think about our history, and especially in a city like Chicago, with redlining. So Chicago is still one of the most segregated cities in the U.S., where I think it's something like 98%, or it was a while ago, of the South Side is black. And so if you have a web series that's occurring in Chicago on the South Side, it certainly should center black people. So, as my web series Queer Life does. Shameless plug.
No, love it. So, Lena Waithe, who's from Chicago, incidentally.
Yes. South Side.
Yes. She was surprised to hear that she was the first female writer that won an Emmy for writing in a comedy series. And I'm wondering, do you think that it's really a fair playing field if even the people doing the work, they don't recognize that anyone like them has ever even been in the history of being recognized for doing the work that they do?
I mean, it's a fair playing field if you're actually on the playing field. But if you're not even in the arena, there's nothing fair about that.
Right.
There's nothing fair about not even being within the area of the field. And so that's what it's been for so long. We know some of us have been getting in little by little. We also know that it's been very hard for them to get through the door, much less kick it open for the rest of us. You do have, Issa Rae does that with her series and with other things and competitions. She's always doing something. I'm seeing it on social media and the internet where she's really opening up a lot of opportunities for people. Speaking of Wanda Sykes, though, it was a surprise to learn that she was a writer on the Chris Rock show, which garnered a lot of favorable praise and attention. And so you would think if someone got an Emmy for comedy writing that was a black woman before Lena Waithe, that maybe it would have been Wanda Sykes for something like the work that she did on the Chris Rock show. But so it's a surprise. It's a surprise to still find out which one of us are even in the writer's room. And so, it has to be about not just getting someone on the inside, but them creating a pathway for some of the rest of us to follow. And that's one of the things that I'm definitely interested in doing, especially with the nonprofit Queer Square Collective. It's about when you happen to be in those spaces, talking to people so you can get other queer artists of color in those spaces. And that's why Queer Square Collective is open to queer artists of all disciplines. Because if I go in as a writer and there's an event happening and they're looking for a caterer or they're looking for a DJ or a musician, then I can certainly say, well, hey, these are people who you need to look at. It's not just about who appears on your stage, so you can have, oh, we need a black one or oh, we need a queer one. It's about who is in your organization, who's behind the scenes, who are you contacting for catering, who are you contacting for these other services. You just think about we need someone to increase our visibility to make sure we've checked off all these boxes. It has to be more inclusive and not just diverse.
Yes, that's well said. We're really just talking about representation. We want to see more people that share our identities and intersection of those identities. Everyone just wants to be seen. That's something that's important. And thrilled that Queer Square is part of making that happen.
We try.
So I want to shift gears just a little bit. If you could choose one piece of work that you've done that you're most proud of, what would that be?
I am proud of everything that I do, and you have to be every step of the way because, so many of us write and work on things and we don't necessarily get to see them to fruition or on a TV screen or published. And so I've been working on a novel for a decade, Everyman, and it's gotten attention here and there. It's been, just enough to keep me going on it. An excerpt published here, a favorable, personalized rejections. And so I've gotten some recent interest in it and I'm working on it. But this is something that I've been working on for a decade.
Right.
And as an artist, your work, it's your children, and so this is a 10-year-old child that I've been carrying around, raising, and nurturing. So certainly it, but also my web series, which I guess it's moving along quite quickly, but even at this point, that's been a 2-year journey. So yeah, I wouldn't choose between the two, but my oldest child, the novel, and then my youngest one of those surprise later in life ones.
I love it. So we're just about out of time. One last thing, what would you like us to know?
I would like you to know that if you are interested in the organization Queer Square Collective, you can go to quare2collective.org. That's QUARE, the number 2, collective.org. And if you'd like to know more about my web series, Queer Life, I know, I love that word queer, and ask me where I get the term from, E. Patrick Johnson, or you can go to queerlifetv.com, and you can also catch a screening of Queer Life at the Black Cinema House on November 10th at 7 p.m.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Ellie, for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. And thank you so much for joining us again. Remember, Affinity hosts this show about intersections of LGBTQ folks, folks of color, low-income folks, just a variety of things. And we do this the fourth Friday of the month at 6:30. So if you want to find out more about Affinity, we are at affinity95.org. Thank you again for being here, and we'll catch you next time. Take care.